So EJ, how do you usually split your budgets between channels that drive signups and those that drive long-term revenue lift?
Yeah, we use BlueAlpha's platform. We have separate models that look at the contribution of incremental signups from our marketing activities. We look at those alongside basically similar models that look at contribution of purchases. And so our kind of, day-to-day or weekly management involves reviewing the variation between the two of those. So if we have a delay in our sales process, so there is that to consider. We look to say, okay, channel A is driving a lot of signups, but they're not necessarily panning out to be customers. Meanwhile, maybe another channel is driving fewer customers and much smaller volume, but we're seeing much higher propensity to purchase or to upgrade. And so as much as we can, we will shift budget appropriately to take advantage and ultimately try to get the lowest CAC as possible across all the channels that we're active on.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And if I were to ask you now, like, and put you on the spot, what is the single metric you open every single Monday morning, and why is that the one that trumps the rest?
Yeah, there is one. It's basically our Stripe account, just to see how many people upgraded over the weekend or to catch up on that. It's a pretty high level metric, but there's always the little bit of like unknown opening the present on Christmas Day or whatever the negative corollary of that is. If it wasn't as good as we would have hoped, the first thing I do every week is like, okay, what was the damage from the weekend? And, where are we sitting to our plan, and how are we going to basically stay on track or stay ahead of plan?
Got it. And continuing on this Stripe one, and maybe moving a bit into board level numbers, what has been actually the hardest one to make stick across finance and marketing, especially when you talk to investors or even C-suite?
Yeah, I'd say that as you get deeper into programs like this, there's a tension that has arisen between volume and efficiency. You can really, in many ways, have one or the other. And that may not be natural to hear, but I was talking to a managing director at Google who outlined this really well, and that oftentimes they will see accounts using Google Ads or whatnot that's spending at a relatively small level and getting something like an 8x ROAS. And so they come to Google and say, hey, we're getting this great return on our ad spend. The board is like, why aren't you spending every dollar you have on that channel? We want to get as much growth as possible. Meanwhile, before they were focusing on this efficiency and getting really strong returns. So they increase their spend, and as you increase spend, the incremental return on each dollar is not the same. As they spend more, that ROAS drops and maybe goes from 8x to like a 2 or 3. And it's not uncommon. I'm sure many people seeing this will experience something similar, where they say, well, we spent more money, but we're not getting the same 8x return. And that's just basically the nature of media. If you can get an 8x return, typically those channels where you can do that are not just infinite wells where you can just throw money down. You're going to spend more, which is going to not necessarily lead to incremental improvement in terms of revenue, customer signups. And so to get to a point, what we balance is always wanting to chase like the bigger number, but then also saying, okay, well, our ROAS might change because of that, or shooting for a strong LTV to CAC, but then that necessarily inhibiting the growth. Because of course, if we are trying to hit a specific CAC, we're not going to spend in places that may have either a less direct return or maybe not necessarily as incremental to our mix. And so what's been really helpful is to see the impact that BlueAlpha has had on being able to show us those things. So being able to see the curves of where our ideal levels of spend are. And on the other side, being able to see where there may be pockets where we can invest in channels that don't have that direct line of sight, but we can then come out and show efficiency indirectly because we're using these advanced statistical methods. I'd say on top of that, the challenge is then getting people's heads wrapped around what statistical methods are. I don't understand them personally. Like, I couldn't explain them to you. I trust that there's people like you that are smarter than me who have figured this out. I know how statistics works, as a science. And so in some ways it's a little bit of like trust, unless you want to actually dive in and understand these very, very complicated topics. And that can be challenging for folks that don't live and breathe marketing.
No, that's very fair. So what would you think is, if you would have, and there's probably not one, but like the single most common attribution blind spot damaging marketing teams' spend allocation right now, from your experience, for example?
Yeah, I've worked in agencies. I've worked at a bunch of startups. Like 100%, it's the kind of black box that is more top of funnel awareness marketing. I am a recovering one of those types of people. I came up in my career through a pure performance shop. And of course, we ran display ads, and that was as top of funnel as we got. There was, in a lot of ways, if you start running display ads, you do see the halo effect. And at the time, we weren't using MMM. I don't even know if it existed, but there was always this kind of trust me. It's like, we've done this for a bunch of clients. If we start running these display ads, either remarketing or programmatic, just going out and finding net new people, we will see a rising tide. But again, you need to have more faith, even more so than the MMM, because there's not really any kind of through line to see the impact, except for you look back 6 months down the road and you see an upward trend, and it's like, oh, that coincides with when we started running display. But that kind of lack of line of sight, I'd say, for folks who haven't experienced it or who are working with tight budgets, can be very scary, because you can either put another dollar into Google Ads and try to find that next set of keywords. You'll have that direct line of sight incrementally, but they may not be as efficient when the smart move may be to start running some YouTube ads, that you can reach new audiences with, create creative. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd say that's the big one that I wish I would have gotten better at sooner in my career.
Do you think it's an educational problem that most people don't know we have these sophisticated models to help with that allocation and attribution as well?
I think somewhat. I think it's a couple of things. I think it's part education, and just a lot of marketers aren't necessarily familiar with how powerful and how effective these tools now are. I also think it's a bit of like, what do they say? Like once bitten, twice scarred, or whatever it is, where it's like you have all these platforms who claim to do statistical modeling and are checking their own homework. And you say, you have Meta saying they drove 200 signups. You see Google saying that they drove 200 signups, and you look at your CRM and you drove 200 signups. So it's like, okay, I'm seeing 400 conversions in the platforms, and I know I only got 200 purchases. So someone's overestimating. And so that has given a little bit of, not a bad name per se. They're just trying to do, what's best for their customers and give them clarity. But for savvy marketers, it's given them a healthy distrust of those methods. And to say they hear modeling, and they're like, oh, like guessing. And so that's probably one of the bigger misconceptions to overcome. But one that BlueAlpha doesn't have, because ultimately you are looking at everything. You're platform agnostic. So you're not able to say, twice as many conversions over here. It's like everything still has to square to the final number.
Your first party data. We don't say 200 here and 200 here, 400 sales, right? And then you only have 200 in your own CRM. That makes sense. So has there been, in your experience, or like a recent situation where actually this more sophisticated analysis of incrementality testing, marketing mix model has actually changed the prior belief of, I thought this channel was super reliable, and we actually found out it was not?
I'd say no. I'd say the opposite, actually. At least for us, we would not necessarily have been spending on channels where we weren't seeing an impact. And so that happens less. The big light bulb moment is kind of the other case. It's like we were spending a little bit on a channel without much visibility other than what we were being told in platform, but we weren't really trusting it because we're like, why should we? Like, we have no line of sight. But like, as we got that visibility and changed budgets and allocated and had the visibility that the MMM provided, we were able to see that, oh, this is having an impact. Speaking specifically like video ads, like things that are non-direct video and display don't provide these breadcrumbs in the digital footprint. If somebody watches a video and then comes back to your site, that just gets tracked as direct. I'd say one of the big lessons for marketers, one of the biggest lessons I have learned as a performance marketer with beehiiv is to not underestimate the power of brand and the holistic impact that has. We've talked about video ads promoting top of funnel, but when you look at, and I've seen this over dozens of accounts, when you look at accounts, that the most popular traffic sources are direct none, paid, and organic search. And when you actually dig into what that means, and the MMM does a great job of this, when you look at what that actually means, direct none means someone's coming directly to your website. It means they already had some awareness of your brand. Nobody wakes up with a brand website in their head and then goes to the website. So they already had your brand in their head from somewhere, word of mouth, an ad, whatever. But we know that there was no genesis directly in their brain. Paid, It depends, but like a lot of times you're running brand defense campaigns. And so a significant portion can come from brand defense, which there are great reasons to do that. beehiiv specifically does that because we have an affiliate program. So if we didn't run it, then like affiliates would run it, and then they would siphon off. We'd pay way more for those. That's a huge part of the campaigns. And so there's a brand component that's directly, obviously, brand awareness. And then the third part is organic search. A huge majority of our traffic comes from branded search within Google Search Console. We know that we can attribute that back to brand. So what drives brand? Brand is driven by this top of funnel awareness. And so when you take a step back, it makes total sense. But I think a lot of times in like data-driven organizations, you really need to show that on paper. Just saying, hey, direct non-paid and this is going crazy, which means we need to invest in top of funnel. They might say, well, why don't we just invest in what's driving that, which is like performance. They think it's performance. It's like, no, it's like this is all being driven by brand, even if in Google Analytics, it's broken up by these different channels.
One last question, coming back to like LTV CAC ratio, in particular for your business, which is driven by paid subscriptions, right? Is LTV CAC, is that like a fixed threshold that you set and then you start to optimize for that ratio, or is it like a moving metric depending on what point in time you are currently at with the business? And does it also vary between different cohorts split out by age or other demographics?
Yeah, I mean, we track this in close to real time, and we evaluate on a monthly basis. So we have time period and age breakdowns of our user base. And so when we're looking specifically in the world of paid, we're looking at these monthly period-based groups. So anybody who signed up or purchased within a given month, cohort base would be looking at when they signed up and attributing the purchase to that sign up cohort. Age is looking at it by how long they've been a user. We use that one way less. But the point being, when we do our reporting, we break things out by month and look at the churn rate, logo churn over that month, the average revenue per user, and we'll come up with the LTV, the expected LTV based on average revenue per user divided by churn rate gives you the expected LTV. And then we know what our CAC is by just taking all of our spend divided by all the new customers we acquire. Very easy equation there. And then we just put them on top of each other. Our target is a 3x plus. Sometimes we hit, sometimes we don't, but that's kind of our North Star. How can we maximize conversions within the world of sticking with this 3x LTV to CAC?
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure.